Welcome to Talking Tuesdays. I am your host, Fancy Quant, and today I wanted to sit down and chat with you guys like the good old days of this podcast here of Talking Tuesdays. And I just wanted to kind of chat with you guys a little bit about AI, struggles, issues, the channel, trying to balance your knowledge and expertise in the quant space as well. I think this is one of the challenges of my channel, but I also think it's a challenge just in general. And we'll see, I'll deviate in some stories here today. But to kick off with here, talking about balance is one of these hard things, especially when you face essentially the edge of hype. And so this isn't necessarily just an AI thing. Like back in 2018, 19, probably around somewhere in there, there was like this big push of ML everything. And so the critique was, banks should no longer be using SAS. Everybody should move to Python. Python's amazing. Machine learning now no longer requires any statistical understanding, any knowledge of the data. All we're going to do is we're going to grab this free, amazing tool of Python. We're going to download a bunch of packages and we're going to throw in a bunch of data and we're going to get something out at the end. Luckily, in that space, at least in the banking side of this, most banks were like, okay, this doesn't make sense. Like, this narrative is a little bit broken. We have regulations in place. Regulators were still fairly strict in these days. And so there was like this understanding. So understanding this from two perspectives. One, for those of you who've never used SAS is absolutely amazing when it comes to documentation, education, and reliability of doing that. So like if it says it's going to do a KS test or it's going to do an ARIMA model or OLS or logistic or some sort of function, they lay out academically on their website, which is free and open to the public, exactly how it's done and how it should be done. And it has references and everything. It's beautiful. And I love it. But SAS got outdated in the sense that SAS didn't keep up with machine learning fast enough. And it makes complete sense because Python is open source. A lot of the companies contributing to these were like the big tech companies like Google and Meta and Microsoft. And there are people all over the board, but they were just contributing willingly to this open source project. And it was a great free loving time. And it was fun, but you started to realize there were some issues like packages aren't consistent across the board. So like you run a logistic regression and like a machine learning package, like, I don't know, like sklearn or something, and you run it in the stats model package. And sometimes like the coefficients don't quite add up. And then one of them doesn't provide p-values, one does. And as banks were regulated and also as a financial responsibility, I would say as a quant responsibility, it is your expertise as a data scientist as well. You have a responsibility of understanding what was done, why it was done, how it was done, and how you structure it and your belief in the system that this is the correct answer to your problem. And so it was hard. It was hard to balance it. I talked a lot about it over the years. People come off as like, oh, Dimitri's very anti-ML. And I'm like, no, I love actually machine learning. I think there's great implications and use cases. I've presented books on this channel. We did deep learning research at one of the firms I was at on credit modeling and credit risk and looking at defaults. We did a lot of interesting work, but again, it was just never published because it's proprietary information. The companies paid for it. We looked at it and we moved on. So as it advanced, though, everybody started to move to Python because it's free and it's open source. I still like SAS. I do think SAS is extremely expensive. I think there are things they could do, perhaps with AI tools, to help make their process better and cheaper, while also maintaining the quality that they have that we've all come to rely on as the banking institution. Now, over the last probably 4 or 5 years here, everyone's really started to move heavily to Python. I've heard a lot of banks are already over at Python. Everything's moved over. It does have machine learning, which has done great. But it's missing a lot of statistical tests and issues around the machine learning space. The statistical modeling is still atrocious, to be honest with you guys. I don't like programming in stats in Python, and it's coming from someone who worked at a Python fintech startup where they were doing everything inside of Python. So my whole team, my job was done in Python. You could bring in other things, like I like R, and R is very academically rigorous, and the process to approve a library through R is really hard and challenging, and they try to set some sort of standard just like SAS does, but in an open source format. But again, there are limitations on the cutting edgeness of it because a lot of the machine learning is going to be done in Python. But that being said, a lot of the rigorous mathematics is only done in R. So you have this balance here. So this was this big hype wave, and it was a challenge because if I said anything against machine learning and Python and how it was being structured, it was like, oh, Dimitri is in the past. He doesn't like anything. He's falling behind. And I kept hearing also from fintechs and all kinds of people, banks and other people as well. They'd say like, oh, the banks are in the past, the investing side, the hedge funds, the tech firms, the fintechs, like everybody has all these, freedom to run with things and they can do crazy, amazing things. But the banks are shackled down with these ridiculous red tape and rules. And I looked at it and I was like, the people saying this were people that had never really worked in the banks, or there were people that didn't really understand what they were doing in the banks. So we had some people that were on this train as well of like run forward at all costs. Who cares about explainability and AI and all these other things? Like they were just running into the wind. Who cares about responsibilities and ethics and logic and math? Like let's just go with automation. And so it was a trying time. I was hoping it would eventually kind of roll over. And I feel like we are at the state where everybody misunderstands the banks. The banks are still running with technology outpacing most fintechs, most hedge funds. The requirements that they had, a lot of it's fallen away, to be academically rigorous and understanding and providing explainability and these things that are put in here with laws and regulations. It makes the modeling more challenging, but it also makes it more interesting because you're solving a harder problem, but also you get better results. Your models tend to stand up to stress tests and, economic crises that could come. And like, there's more robustness around the models because you add in these extra requirements of understanding and logic and testing and not just chasing correlations with this. So that was the first wave. Now, when we look at the AI hype wave, I feel like we're in the second wave of this ML, like I can't talk about it sort of wave, because you now have this lack of balance where you really have like two strong camps. And unfortunately, the majority of people are sitting in the hype camp, and there are a few people sitting in the anti-AI camp. And when I come in the middle, no matter what I say, I am viewed as either too pro-AI or I am very anti-AI and I'm falling behind and I should be using AI in everything that I do. And so I'm in this camp now where I feel like it's even worse than it was in the machine learning wave, where it's like if I say anything negative about AI, like for example, like using general AI, using a lot of these models is just awful. It doesn't work for 99.9% of problems. It's a fancy Google machine. Like you could look up 99% of this and not need AI to do it. There are people that are actually using AI correctly. And I was talking to somebody recently, and one of these interesting insights was, they were saying, like arguing back and forth with me. So I was trying to give them an example of like why AI wouldn't work and how it wouldn't work. And I'm coming at this from this very like, esoteric mathematical, like talking about how statistical modeling is put into the math and why it can't do it and how the internet sucks and the information on the internet's actually pretty poor. And then they were like, Dimitri, you have to narrow it down, and you have to tell it needs to only use information in a very, very specific spot, right? You can't say like, go search everything. Like your expertise is needed to narrow down the information it's using. So it's not just the prompt engineering, it's also the space. And then I said, yeah, and also the expertise to check to make sure the answer is correct. And they go, well, yes, of course. And I'm like, okay, like this is a valid point, right? And I think it's an interesting insight. A lot of big firms I'm seeing aren't even considering. They're using the tools as is. And so now you're starting to think about agentic AI and putting in specializations and tasks and setting up systems of these. And it has interesting use cases in this. And I think there are great efficiencies with that. I mean, often like when you're programming and you're stuck and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do, and there's no one around that can help you, and you've Googled it and you can't find anything. AI can be great for this because it can help you get a solution or something that's, a little bit different, and it can kind of challenge the status quo, maybe come at it from a different perspective, and you can really dive in and say like, oh, I didn't think about doing it with this sort of coded format, and you can go through and solve it and work on that process here. Now, is it the magic bullet on the far right that AI is going to solve everything and get rid of coding and we're never going to see programming again? No, it's not. I'm sorry. It is not. It is a massive lie. And I think this is one of these issues where it's like, now when I say that, people are like, oh, you're against AI and you don't know and you should really do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, there's so many people that I don't understand why they're so bought into it, because like I already know they're not getting paid. Like, ChatGPT or OpenAI specifically with them, or Claude or like Anthropic with them, those companies aren't paying you to say these things. But interestingly enough, people are really bought into it. And I feel bad because I feel like the people that are often most impressed by it are the people that are just really bad at doing things. Like, if you're not really good at math and then you plug in some math equations into there, like generically, and it comes up with some sort of answer and you're like, oh, that's really cool because I couldn't do it and it did it really fast. Like, it's amazing. And then you have people that, like, coding is another example. Like, I can code pretty well and I'm working in my coding realm and I'm in it and I'm coding every single day. Even when new problems come up, the ability to problem solve fast and efficiently, and even if you need to like look something up, like a syntax issue or a new function or something, it's really quick to go through Google and do it and then write out your code and move forward. The people I see that are really, really excited about it are senior management who don't know how to program because they think somehow they're going to be able to program and get rid of programmers, which there's this whole realm of like creativity and maintenance and design and engineering that actually goes into software, and even just like scripting, like a lot of quants just do scripting like myself. There's logic and process of how it was done and why it was done. And then on the flip side, you see a lot of junior people that are really excited because they don't know. And so I think in some ways, like, oh, this would be great to help juniors, but it's really not. It's like a handicap of making you really dumb. Like, imagine like a car, like, right? Like, how many people can drive a standard? So, actual manual shifting on a car. Not a lot of people can, right? And again, you don't need to. The automatic transmission on an automatic car shifts and does a lot of process here. But if I throw you into a car manual and I say, okay, go ahead, drive this, and you've never driven one, or I kind of explain how it works to you, have the general gist, and I throw you and say, oh, go ahead and do it. A lot of people aren't going to be able to drive it. It's going to stall out the car. They're going to struggle, especially when you're on a hill, right? And you got to hit the brake and you got to do the clutch control, give it a little bit of gas, pull out the little clutch a little bit and slowly move so your car doesn't roll down the hill. This is similar to this process where it's like you're never going to learn it unless you do it. And so if you take away a lot of the doing, I don't see AI as a beneficial tool to educate the next great wave of experts and managers and people in the senior roles, because you're not going to understand why we're doing it, how we're doing it. And often there's this other kind of conundrum that plays into this, which is going to be confirmation bias. And I think this is the biggest weakness with AI. So for those of you that don't know, I'm strongly, strongly against using technology for education and learning, which is really mind-blowing because I teach on YouTube and talk about this through video content. But I do think, and I do talk about it on my channel, like getting textbooks and doing math with paper and pen, and even just programming things out and struggling with it with a computer, but going back and forth through the process, really struggling with things, is something that I feel like is often missed. And so we start to see now there's some research coming out, people have been talking about a little bit more, that it's like slowing down reading scores, math scores are getting worse, people are struggling harder, and it's like we've been pumping in all this tech, but it's not helping, it's actually making things worse. And as somebody who likes math and stats and everything, I don't think you can really do it and think about it well if everything's just spoon-fed to you on this digital platform, and then you're like, yeah, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense. Like, you have confirmation bias because everything's so easy. You're like, yeah, that makes sense. And when we see this now, especially with AI, when it's delivering sorts of tools and processes back, people start to say like, oh yeah, this makes complete sense. Like, this is great. Let's go ahead and run with it. There's no thought process of like, how do we make this slightly better? Or how do I change the tone of this email? And everyone's like, yeah, Dimitri, you can do that with AI. You can, but you're missing the entire point. And I think that's where a lot of the AI fails. You are missing the human connection. I need to explain to you an idea that you need to deeply understand so that you can make a decision. And so you can take responsibility of that decision that you're making. That's how employees work through management. When you take that away and you say, okay, everything is automated, I don't care where it comes from, and yes, I reviewed it and it looks good, and you go ahead and make a decision, like, there's no longer an ownership and a responsibility process here. People say, but Dimitri, what if we could automate everything? And what if, like, my mower, I have a robot mower. My robot mower struggles to figure out how to mow my yard. And it's one of the more advanced ones. I've had it for a few years now. Trust me, there's a lot of challenging issues with the automation. There's a lot of insights into understanding how things work, why things work, having ownership over a process or procedure. Nothing's going to be simple and automated. And a lot of this can be done with software automation as well, but it hasn't been done because things are challenging to do, and there needs to be responsibility and transparency and insight and understanding, and everyone needs to get involved in this, right? It reminds you of like people like running for the cliff. Like what if everything's automated and it's amazing? I go, great. Let's say you go out there, you apply for all these jobs, everyone declines you. Let's go say you apply for a bunch of loans, everyone declines you. I'm not going to tell you why. Government just thinks you suck. So too bad. It's AI. Like, and people go, well, that's really like crude. Like, that's not how it's going to work. It's going to be really smart and it's going to be ethical. And no, it's not. It's not going to be. And also, just as a personal note of being a human being, of like, I want to understand why. And I think this is something that's been missed a lot. And I think this is where behavioral finance will take a bit of a boom here in maybe the next 5-10 years. At least I hope it does. Like if somebody says like, oh, I stole $20 from you. Your first reaction, especially if I could paint you a picture of someone that looks like a criminal, they're really sketchy. I told you that person stole $20 from you. You're going to be upset and you're going to be grumpy and you're going to be like, oh, these dang people, I'm going to get them back. I need to get my money. Whereas if I say, oh, hey, that child over that little child over there that's pretty dirty and on the street corner and stuff, they don't have any food and they're starving and they took $20 from your pocket. Your response is probably going to be like, I wish they wouldn't have taken the $20, but they do need it. They look really sad. They do look like they need some food. And you might even offer to give them more at this point. You might be like, oh, let me see if I can help them. Maybe if I can, they look like they need a pair of shoes and like you're willing to do this. The actual outcome of this is you had $20 stolen. That's the math. Okay. Now, if I build you a story for each of those scenarios, and it's the same exact decision, the same exact process, but I build you a story, your emotional system, your empathy often will play into this and how you feel and act and respond, right? AI tools don't do that. Models don't do that. And it's, as I'm going through a lot now with looking at quantitative finance, there's this process of, it's like an art, okay? It's the same for music. I think this is why AI is actually going to be more damaging for music than anything. Like everyone's really excited. The tech community is super excited. They're off running in the fields about how AI is going to replace all these musicians. You guys, one reason that people like myself, I'm a huge music fan, love music, is I actually relate with the artist. Okay, it's not just like, oh, I like this song and it's poppy. And there's people like that listen to pop music and have no idea about the artist, their lives, their history, anything else. But the people that really drive the music industry, the people that, I don't want to say this, but I'll say it. The people that really get actual true value out of music because they're better people are people that really dig into like the artist's life. So give you an example. I've been listening a lot to Mac Miller. For those of you that don't know who Mac Miller is, Mac Miller is a Philadelphia-based artist. He struggled with depression. He has some really interesting and fun albums through the years. Some of these, like the Kids album, is my absolute favorite. It's one of my favorites. He has a lot of good albums, but there are some albums that aren't my favorite as well. But Mac's known for going through this journey of drugs and depression, and a lot of this comes through in the music, and you can relate and feel it. And like, there's a song. It's called like Good AM. That's the album's Good AM. But there's this song, I think it's called Good News or something like that. And in this song, he's relating to the fact like everybody wants him to tell them like everything's great and it's amazing and the world's rainbows and butterflies. And he's like, that's not what the albums are about. It's life is hard and I'm struggling through this depression. He's going through this process. Understanding the artist and being able to relate with them on a personal level, on a music level, understanding these sorts of processes, that is important. Okay, there is a human bond and connection. And it's why a lot of you watch my channel. You don't watch my channel because like Dimitri's going to give you the quick short answer. I mean, we're looking at the camera here. We're at 18 minutes and 45 seconds and I'm still rambling on here. And if you're still watching at this point, right, you start to understand like you want to relate, you want to understand depth, you want to have insight and meaning in life and in purpose. And often when you're trying to get to an answer quickly, it goes away. Now, AI is great for things like we just don't care about, right? There's things that we just don't want to do. But I also think it's important to understand there is a need. There is a biological need for humans to bond, understand, communicate. And the tech community, I think, as a whole lacks this. The quant finance community as a whole lacks this. The bankers, the finance. A lot of people miss this because they're so driven on the one goal. And like right now, that one goal is how do we get AI into absolutely everything? And how do we get cutting edge? And how do we get a bigger valuation for our firm? They missed the human process of this. And I saw an interview recently. I was listening to Rick Rubin with Andre 3000. And Andre 3000 was talking about how damaging it can be to be isolated and how there's this need to go out, but he doesn't like to go out. And you're saying one of these things is like he goes to the laundromat, right? He's quite wealthy. For any of you that don't know, Andre 3000's a musician. And he goes to the laundromat to do his laundry. Now, many of us, including myself, are like, oh, that's gross. Like, I don't know. It's just people that can't afford a washing machine go and use a laundromat, and you have like this negative connotation with it. But Andre 3000 was saying he likes doing it because it's like, it's like this interaction, like human experience of like talking to other people. Like you're just sitting there waiting for your laundry to get done. And so you can sit and you can chat with people. And I think this is part of this meaningful insight, which is also being missed with AI. And I think this is why many instances come off as anti-AI, because I think AI has some use cases, right? But there are a lot of cases it should not be used. It's a higher risk and it has a bunch of issues with it. So I think the human aspect needs to be considered. The other piece of this is going to the banking community, and I've debated on making a complete video on it and talking a little bit more about it, but I know I will just get either people will completely ignore it and no one will have the conversation, or I will get completely annihilated with people just griping and complaining in the comments and telling me I have no idea what's going on. But one of these is I see what's called, validation teams at banks, it's called model validation, or it's called model risk management, MRM. And companies are out actually trying to say they need to change what's called SR 11.7, which is the structure and helps you define what a model is and going through this process. In simple terms, a model has inputs and you're going to predict some sort of output and you have some sort of model error in there. And of course, this entire process is math and stats and statistical theory comes into play on how we test things and know that we estimated the right process. But there's an estimation part of this to get to some sort of prediction at the end of it, and there's an error. Okay, LLMs don't do that. As many people know, they're not models. You can call it a model. It's more like an algorithm, but it's not a model. And it's also not deterministic in the sense they keep adding in new information. It's still learning throughout this process. And even when you create and generate a layer on top of an LM trained specifically to do a specific task, you're now introducing kind of variations of this. But there's no estimation and there's no exact answer typically, right? Now we could use it for doing mathematics, but the LLM is not designed, operated, theoretically sound to do predictions of a very specific thing. It's not a model. And because of it's not a model, and I don't think you should use it as a way of a black box prediction magical model, it should not be validated or reviewed by model risk management. And a lot of people I think are like, what? You got to be kidding me. They can't believe I'm saying this. But it's not a model. It's mathematically, statistically, theoretically not a model. And unfortunately, only people with a background deep in math and stats and econometrics will understand that. You have to understand that. If your MRM teams are out running and wanting to govern and process and review and validate use cases of LLMs, I would say it's an overreach and an abuse of power in many instances here, because let's look and think about how this is being done and why it's not a model in itself. Okay, so a model example here would be I'll use some traditional examples. A model is you put in a bunch of financial characteristics on a consumer and you predict out the probability they're going to default. Okay. Another one would be you put in a bunch of data to predict out derivative pricing. It's another example. So there's inputs that go into this. There's an estimation process and procedures. We're trying to minimize some sort of error at the end of it. And then we get some sort of prediction that we're going to get out of this and we're going to do a decision on. But the model itself has estimation and it has a model error and it has some sort of prediction that comes out. That's what a model is. A perfect example of a non-model, right, is accounting. Accounting is not a model. I'm not estimating things and I'm not trying to predict things. You could argue that in the corporate finance side and have a model on that side. But accounting is a set of rules. This is what we do when expenses come in, they go into the expense account. When income comes in, it goes into an income account. When we trade cash for goods, we reduce our cash. We increase the goods that we have in inventory. You go through this process. They're not models. They're tools or they're processes, right? So banks have done a really good job in the past at differentiating this. Now, the issue we run into when we get into use cases now is let's say your quant team's using it. Let's say any sort of team doing software engineering or programming is using it in Copilot or Codex or something like that. And they're using this to help them programming code. Okay. You now have an increased operational risk. This is not from, this isn't the LLM itself. It's not that LLM if you claimed it was a model. It's that you have somebody that generates some sort of code, whether it's an employee, whether I Google it and I misinterpret it, whether I use, OpenAI or, all these sorts of tools. It doesn't matter how I get to that. The issue is that I personally own the code, manage, maintain, and write that code. Now, regardless of if I use some sort of Copilot to help me write it, or if I Google code and I adjust it and fine tune it, at the end of the day, I'm the one that's writing the code. It's a tool, right? I wouldn't say oh, you're going to use Spider versus Jupyter Notebooks versus JetBrains. I don't know what JetBrains is called. I can't remember, but using these different IDEs, which are tool that I write all of my code in for Python, I don't go and say, I'm going to validate that, and I'm going to make sure that's operating correctly because I'm the validation team. It's not a model. It's a tool. And so Copilot, a lot of these things are tools for that. Other use cases we had seen, or I've talked to people about, was like trying to get rid of SQL, so SQL, for doing data queries and polls. And the idea was like, what if management could go in and type like, pull third quarter profitability for the subprime mortgage portfolio, and they could pull up all this data they needed, and they didn't have to know any SQL. They could just type it in and get it out. Well, there are issues with that because employees had to be able to be very, very specific. Sometimes data was kept in multiple tables, and different tables stored different sorts of transactions. Like some might include expenses on the real estate. Some might not include expenses if that's in a different table. Like you have to still know the data in the tables, and those are issues. But even then, it's still a tool. Like we don't validate SQL. If you're having AI pull data for you, it's like using SQL. Like why would you validate that? I don't understand. I would tell you as a risk management perspective, though, all of these sorts of things are non-models. They should go over to the risk department, and it's an operational risk. Every use case of a vendor tool, which is what these are, should be validated in the sense of a risk management perspective of going through like what are the potential exposures, what are the potential hazards and risks, and then doing like an RCSA, so risk control self-assessment, trying to determine how do we put controls in place to prevent people from doing stupid things with it. And I'm going to tell you, I've already heard stories of people using it for really stupid, irresponsible things. I see employees too also like running a lot of their emails through it after they've already spent like 30 minutes writing an email or putting together this big document. And then they'll rerun it through there and they'll make a bunch of changes and edits based on that and send it out. And I'm like, if you did a good job on the first go, like why are you wasting time using this? Like it's not efficient at this point. You're anti-efficient. But who knows? Maybe they're increasing quality or something. But anyways, they're not models and they're not making decisions on that. Now, let's pretend we wanted to use it as a model. So they said, okay, Dimitri, I'm going to get a bunch of data. I'm going to feed it into this LLM. And I'm going to say, okay, here's the realm of the data we have. Come up with a prediction on who's going to default. Okay. That model still is going to have to do math and still going to have to create an equation to do the math. And one thing that I have found with a lot of people, especially the tech community and the machine learning community, everything is just a math equation. A decision tree is a math equation, right? That formula that you do with the summation, so doing a little summation sign, all the values divided by that. The equation for like an average, that is the equation. And you have it from I, typically from like I to N, right? You have like a range that you're summing these up. With the decision tree, you take data and you break it into chunks, and it's just taking an average where this variable is in this range. So it's like a math equation. Like this is the equation where, this range is this, where this is this, where this is that. Now, computer scientists often see this as, Dimitri, it's like an if function. Yeah, it's the same thing. It's like an if one. Like if this, then this, then this, then this, else this. Like you have like your logic that goes through this. It's still math though. You're still applying a math function to every sort of pocket and calculation across. That's just math. And math is nothing but logic. And so we go through this process. And so anything can be written out in math. So even if you had an LLM do this, it would still be building you a model, and somebody should be reviewing the model. And then the final model that would be validated would be the actual model, right? Nobody goes through model validation and comes back and says, oh, well, Dimitri, can you sit down and do like a psychological review and explain to me how you learned how to do all this? Like, no, this is not what's happening. When I build models and somebody validates them, you validate the model process and you look at the steps that you did to get to that final model, and you validate if that's correct and where there's could be improvements or issues or hurdles. And just like this case and just like this process here, that would be the same thing. Even if you had an LLM do everything, there's so many risks associated with doing this. This is a huge no-no. Do not use them to build models. They can be used as a tool to help assist you in thinking about things and challenging you. But again, we have confirmation bias that's going to come into this, and model development's really hard. So often when you find a quick, easy solution, you will have an enormous confirmation bias where you're like, I've spent too much time on this. Like, let's just go with this. You don't stop to think this through in a logical stance and the engineering behind this. Anyways, but even when you go through this process, even if you had an LLM build a model and it outputted all the steps, you would then validate the steps that are coming out as like an agent, like someone who is a person who built a model, and you review it based on the merits of a model. You would not validate the LLM as a vendor tool or vendor model. It is a tool. Like nobody's out validating how to use Word or Excel and making sure these things work. It's a tool. So I don't see a use case for model risk management getting involved at all with doing validations of tools and use cases for LLMs. This should go into your ERM framework, enterprise risk management. Your risk, so you have CRO, and then you should have quantitative and qualitative teams underneath, like compliance and governance, or like the ERM softer qualitative sides. And then you have like model validation, so MRM, model risk management, as your quantitative side. And as you put all these together, this would be something that's a tool, and it would go into like a governance review process framework and looking at sorts of issues around the controls and how it's being used. Now, it's huge in compliance. Compliance should be really, really involved with a lot of this, to be honest with you guys. Because like, how are you making decisions with these sorts of LLM tools? How are they being optimized and used in functions? I will argue you probably should build out a more quantitative team on the qualitative process here with like using LLMs. So understanding like the math, the applications, the use cases, number theory, like issues with like if a model, LLM predicts something that's not in the space of expectation and what you do to control that and putting guardrails in place. This is compliance and risk management 101, but it's not super quantitative. It should be on the qualitative side of this. So that's a lot of the issues with that. Now, let me end off on that AI rant a bit and dive into one of the other struggles I've had at this channel, which again is the balancing piece of this. And it's been sticking true to myself of doing quantitative finance. But as I do that, there is the quantitative side and there is the finance and application side. And it tends to be, I struggle to stay in the entire spectrum without people yelling and screaming and throwing tantrums on both ends. Let me explain. So if I start to go over something like, I start teaching like value at risk, I teach things like the CAPM, we do like economics and do supply and demand and how these things are impactful and important in game theory. These are all traditional finance ideas. And as soon as I start to really teach those and dig deep, which I've tried to avoid, then the finance community goes, oh yeah, we're quants. We're doing the work. We're doing value at risk. We're doing, Monte Carlo simulations. Like we know exactly what we're doing. But you don't. You're missing the whole theoretical side and the math side and like looking at other detailed things that matter and make a big impact on this. Like one of these is like trying to explain why limited data produces bad estimations and results and how you theoretically overcome that and what you should do. There's a whole bunch of things. And so when I do that, then that community starts to get it's called like the Kruger-Dunning effect, where it's like they are convinced now they're all quants. And so now the reason this becomes an issue is because they say, oh, well, I'm going to go out and apply for all these jobs. And then I'm disgruntled, I'm upset because Dimitri's advice was bad. I couldn't get a job with my finance undergrad. And I'm like, I know, but I can't put that disclaimer in every single video. Like when I'm teaching, like what is a stock and what is a bond, which I have videos on, it's traditional finance, but you need to know that from a quant perspective on the quant side to be able to model the finance side. Now, let me move over to the flip side of that. If I start to talk too much about like math and number theory and real analysis and getting into the weeds on these sorts of things and doing the math, then people kind of flip on that and they say like, oh, I'm a quant because I have a math degree and mathematicians are the smartest and the physics community is the absolute worst. I'll tell you this, the physics community is the worst. They'll say, oh, I'm a physicist, I can solve any problem. I know how to do this. We really understand how to do, theory and math and putting it all together. And I'm like, yeah, but did you take capital markets and do you understand supply and demand? Like, economics is stupid. Like nobody likes economics and it's hand wavy and it's not really a hard science. I'm like, really? So you think quantitative finance is a hard science? That is pretty entertaining. We are modeling consumer corporate decision-making, which is like psychology of finance and retail people. Like we're doing a soft science. We're just applying quantitative methods to a soft science. And so the channel itself, I've tried to lean more towards the quantitative side because going back to the jobs and the preparedness, there are a lot of math and physicists and statisticians and econometricians and a bunch of people on this side that don't even know quant finance exists, that have really solid foundational principles. And all they need to do is learn a lot more of the business application and the finance side, they'll be well prepared. Going the other direction, I can tell you, coming from the other side, it is much, much harder. Like missing out on like real analysis and measure theory and then trying to jump into stochastic calculus and understanding why we are doing things has been challenging and hard for the channel. And then if my videos are very long-winded like this one, but it's a Talking Tuesday podcast and I don't really care. When they're long-winded, then people tend to be like, oh, I didn't get my answer within 30 seconds, especially now with AI and shorts and reels and TikTok and everything. They're like swiping quickly and they're going through this and they're ignoring all of the good content. They're ignoring the whys. Like, why are we building this model and why is the math important? And often it's hard for me to even explain it because you go from something like I did a video on number spaces with decision trees, which I'm very, very proud of. And somebody commented like, Dimitri, this is real analysis. Like, you're doing real analysis and explaining like whole numbers, which is super simple, but it's real analysis. And I'm like, exactly. You get it. Like, somebody gets this finally. Like, I don't know if anyone gets this. And it's hard to explain that because it's like, I can't go from a book. Like, I've got to pull out a book. I always pull out a book. Like this one. This is the Analysis 1 book. I think this one's by Tao. Yeah, Terrence Tao. Anyways, it's real analysis, but it's like number theory. And like, if you look in the book itself, some of the topics like set theory, integers and rationals, real numbers, like limits and sequences, series, infinite sets. Like, these are all, when you read these, you're like, oh, these are really boring. And I'm like, I'm so tired of reading about like a probability space. And like, it's so annoying. But then having to teach that, like, you need that to understand numbers and spaces. And then you need that to get into like the theory of doing the modeling itself. And then you can't do the modeling without the programming. So I'm trying to explain real analysis to statistics and statistical theory, and then applying that to economics, which is econometrics, and then applying that to the business. Like, it's too hard to explain everything, and I need people to watch like bunch of material just to get to the basics here. And that's probably where AI also screws us, because now people are like, I just want the answer quickly. And that's not going to be where it's at. People that are going to succeed in this world are going to be those that are like really in depth in reading. So books are king. I still love reading books. I would like to write a book one day. It's been on my radar, but I'm like, that's a big responsibility to bite out of that. So anyways, that's a bit of my rant here as well. It's been challenging to stay true though to the YouTube channel, to be honest with you guys. It is much easier to generate like clickbaity material. It's a lot easier also to complain, which I find I try to avoid, but many people have pointed it out. It's much easier for me to point out all these issues with the industry and people, and like, I'm like, trying to like herd cats. Like, if I could fix all these problems and like, but there's also like this big hype train that's pushing against you constantly to talk about things, like talk about like trading and salaries. Like, that's what really matters. And I'm like, no, that doesn't really matter. That's not quant. That's just like an exhaust. That's like something that comes off of the process of doing quant. Like, you do quant because you love math and stats and programming, and then you just happen to get paid well to do it, right? Anyways, and that's been a whole struggle as well. Like, how do you keep the channel on the rails for that? Because I try to address those, and like, it's very frustrating when I'll make a video. Like, I made the one on like why independent quants or traders don't exist. And of course they exist, but trying to explain like the logic of why a lot of people end up going to companies, and there's like learning opportunities and teamwork and specialization and like great quality points out of the video. But that video will do extraordinarily well. It has like, I think, over 100,000 views, and everyone likes to rag on the video, and some people understand it, and it's like this big frustration. That should not be the popular content. My videos on like how to program an R, or like how to build a decision tree. These sorts of things should be the core of this, but it's frustrating from a creator stance, and it's very easy to kind of tempting to go onto clickbaity topics and rile the crowds, or even just to go with the crowds. Like, if I'm like, oh, AI is the best thing in the world, traders are quants, anyone doing math and stats, you're just nerds in the back office. Like, let's just make a bunch of money, and this guy's making even more money, and even though I'm making, $250,000, I'm going to tell everybody I'm making $2 million, and it's going to be great and wonderful. I'm going to sell this online course to everybody. Like, that would honestly be a profit-making venture. And people say, yeah, but it wouldn't last in the long run. No, it'd last in the long run. There's unfortunately too many people that want to hear that. And even though they could be like hemorrhaging money following bad advice, they would still just stick with it because, I don't know, people just want a free lunch that doesn't exist. So Anyways, thanks for listening. If you guys found this video or this podcast entertaining, let me know in the comments below. I have not done one of these in a very, very long time where it's long form, me just chatting with you guys, throwing some ideas out. They're not very structured and organized, but it's how I think and process, and I think a lot of the topics could be interesting. I don't know, maybe they're interesting, maybe they're not. Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can get this content to your friends as well. And as always, until next time.